Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode 81 of the Lean Blog Podcast for January 6, 2010. Our guest today is Rob Bryant, Vice President of Quality at CSC Computer Sciences Corporation. And in this podcast, Rob will talk about how CSC, as a non-manufacturing company, uses Lean for their business and for their customers. And Rob is also going to share his very special and unique story of why he got into the quality field in the first place. I think you'll find it very interesting and inspirational to hear Rob talk about that in today's episode. So as always, I want to thank you for listening to the Lean Blog Podcast. Rob, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Lean Blog Podcast today.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to join you.
It's our pleasure to have you here. I was wondering if you could start first by introducing Computer Science Corporation and how you use Lean in the context of your business.
Sure. This is Rob Bryant, Vice President of Quality with Lean Six Sigma, and CSC is an outsourcing company. Many very large companies will outsource all of their IT, their servers, their networks to a company like us. Our largest competitors are IBM and EDS. And
I mean, you're outside of what people might typically expect application of Lean in a traditional manufacturing or production environment. So can you describe a little bit about how you use Lean, what types of processes you're typically improving, what types of results that you get from using Lean?
Oh, certainly. Lean began in manufacturing, of course, but I think it quickly migrated to services. Manufacturing, you have something that you can hold in your hand and something that you could, reduce the size or make faster or something. Services is a little more difficult in my mind because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to put your hand on something and say, this is what I did today. So improving is, in my mind, maybe even a little more complicated in services. So how we apply Lean is to our process steps. For instance, we have processes that might be 30 or 40 steps long. So we'll look at each step in terms of its value, and those steps we believe are non-value added. We begin leaning, and we've had 40 and 50 step processes that were costing too much labor, taking too long, not meeting client requirements. And we've been able to lean them down to 12, 15, 20 steps sometimes. And as you know, if you can eliminate a step, that's one step that can't go wrong again. And so that's the power of Lean. So we apply it to internal processes. We also apply it to client processes. Many of our clients have a strong Lean Six Sigma practice, and they ask us to partner with them. Then we have other clients that we introduce Lean Six Sigma as just part of our services to them when we're awarded the contract, and we begin applying that. And many times they ask us to help them with Lean Six Sigma and just expand the scope of the contract.
Rob, from your experience with the Lean manufacturing methodology and quality improvement, what are some things that you found that work well with implementing Lean management practices, and maybe some things that you found don't work well or can be problematic for people?
In IT services, some of those things that work well are the 5 S's and FMEA, the failure mode effects analysis, things like that. And the reason we find those effective, applying Lean to our services, is we can reduce interruptions. Interruptions are those things that you're sitting there at your desk and you have flybys. You have a customer walk by and ask you things. And so we're able to reduce interruptions using Lean with online help type situations. Poor and incomplete definition is something else that we've been able to Lean and get the contract right in the beginning. when we put a contract together well in the beginning, everything downstream works well. Non-value-added steps is something else we go after. Non-value-added approvals. It was really interesting. NASA called me a few years ago and asked me to lead a lean event for them because they needed 18 approvals for very inexpensive parts and services and things like that. So it was really interesting. I pulled a couple hundred purchase orders at random, and you and I understand why random is so important. So I looked at large POs, small POs, and recent ones and old ones and things like that. And I noticed a recurring theme that there was only 6 or 7 of those 18 approvers that were adding value. In other words, they were circling something or saying, check that vendor, check that buyer, check that date, check the address. Maybe the address changed in the contract, that kind of thing, the ship-to address. And so the other ones, they were signing simply because they felt that it was required, or a lot of times it's rice bowl kind of things. It's power kind of things. It's, I can keep my job as long as I'm approving things and signing things, and the government, the bureaucracy in the government can lend itself to that very easily. So what we did is we eliminated a lot of the non-value-added approvals, and then for political reasons, some we couldn't. We took them off the critical path. So we said, we're still going to send you a PO, but we're not waiting because you've never delivered any value. And of course, I was a little bit more politically correct in the delivery of the message. But we went from 18 approvers down to 9. Just absolutely amazing. And it was just applying very simple, rudimentary lean principles. Non-value-added requirements is something that we've applied lean to. Loops is something. There's some loops that you want in your process. If you modify a process and then you want it to loop back to you so that you can ensure that the process is working well, that's fine. But many loops, of course, are just rework. It's things that we didn't design that way, and so we go after a lot of loops, bottlenecks, of course. We also go after those steps those processes that are serial, that very few steps are parallel, and we'll try to, maybe in a 12-step process, and all 12 steps are serial, if you can move 4 or 5 of those steps into parallel mode, then really you can complete the process in the same amount of time it was taking you to do 7. So we apply that quite a bit. We've had a lot of success in almost all our accounts with Lean Six Sigma. We've had tremendous success stories. We've been able to financially validate over $200 million of costs, either reducing costs or increasing revenue directly attributable to those Lean Six Sigma projects. It was really interesting. Early in the program, I asked one of the very senior execs in the company, who's the most negative and nasty financial folks in the company? And it's interesting that a name came to his mind quickly, which kind of scared me a little bit. Well, I had that person begin financially validating our Lean and Six Sigma projects because I realized if I can convince them, I can convince anyone. And it worked rather well. He's one of my biggest cheerleaders. No, he still takes nasty pills every morning and that kind of thing, but he's one of my biggest cheerleaders now, and it actually helps validate the program having him as the validator of those early projects.
Sure. So it sounds like some general themes of what you're saying is that you found the ability to view almost any sort of work as a process, including paperwork processes, administrative processes like contracting or work like that, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so are there, considering your environment and the type of work that you and your company do, are there any of the lean methods that you found difficult to apply or things that haven't worked well in your setting?
Yeah, I guess WIP is something that we struggle to implement in that it's difficult to assess a service as how much work is done. You know what I mean? In manufacturing, it's a little bit easier when you're dealing with widgets on an assembly line. But WIP is something that we haven't applied nearly as well as probably we should. I know some of our competitors use it. But I think almost all of the other lean tools we've been able to utilize. And not too long ago, there was a lean event where the client, the problem is that it was taking much too long for them to invoice their clients. And so they asked me to lead a lean event, a 3-day lean event for them, and we had a few CSC folks in the room, but it was almost all clients. And I was able to introduce some technology to the process, but very little technology. It was actually the reduction of handoffs in the process that was able to speed up their invoicing by probably 10 days at least. And, the DSO with a large company, 10 days can be pretty dramatic.
So I was wondering if you could share some thoughts looking ahead as we're getting into 2010 here. What's your outlook for lean for your company or across industries?
Well, we think that lean will even be bigger in CSC, and I'll talk about industry in just a minute, even bigger in CSC because we actually introduced Six Sigma to CSC first, only because it was more available in the service industry when we began applying this back in 2002. And very quickly, some of the management became disillusioned with Six Sigma, saying, well, it takes too long, it costs too much, and they're right. And so we were looking for a leaner approach to Six Sigma, and then lean for manufacturing quickly swept through services. We began applying lean. So now we begin every project in the define stage of DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, the 5 steps of DMAIC. So we begin every project in define. But if we find that we understand what the problems are, we understand what the solutions are we want to put in place, so really all we're doing is reducing costs or reducing labor, and we do understand the problem, then we won't go through the rigors of DMAIC, Six Sigma. We'll just do a lean event, or we'll use lean tools to reduce the redundancy that's causing the problem. So we believe that lean is even going to be bigger in CSC than it has been. And I'm seeing the same trend in industry. Some of my counterparts with some of my other companies are experiencing the same types of disillusionment with Six Sigma, and lean is relieving them and helping them improve their programs and improve products and services.
And can you touch on what you think some of the broader trends will be across industry?
Well, I think that what we're going to be seeing in industry is more pressure on reducing middle management, reducing costs. Since we're in a recession, we're finding, and since the dollar is so weak, we're finding that many countries now are buying U.S. because the dollar is so weak. But the only way they will is if we reduce our costs to compete with third world countries. So we're seeing much more pressure on reducing costs in those services that we really had given up to third world countries because we couldn't compete. Well, now with a weak dollar and with our recession, we have to put workers. We have to put people back to work, and the only way to do that is reduce costs. We're seeing increased pressure on the quality community within those companies to help them reduce costs to be competitive.
Okay, thanks. And as final thoughts, was wondering, what it was, if you could tell your story about what it was that led you into working in quality as a profession.
Well, it might be a little bit of a unique story in my case, in that in 1982 I fell 55 feet from an oil derrick, became an instant paraplegic. I was in the hospital 4.5 months. The first 2 or 3 weeks just to survive. Falling 55 feet, I had many internal injuries, broken back, broken bones, a head injury, and thank goodness in time there was no brain damage, so I'm still me. But I live in a wheelchair. I learned to walk a little bit with braces and crutches, and but basically I live in a wheelchair, every day, and have since that day, and I will the rest of my life. And so I guess what took me into quality is two things. One, I wanted to understand why that pulley failed, and I wanted to make products safer, and I wanted to improve quality. But on a much more personal level, about 2 weeks after my injury, I was sitting there at home in my wheelchair, and my oldest son was 3 years old, and my second son was just months old at the time of my injury. As a matter of fact, that son and I learned to walk together, him with 2 healthy legs and me with braces and crutches. But my oldest son, was staring at me, and I asked him, well, what's wrong, son? And he went into his room, and he came back with the Daddy book. And the Daddy book was filled with stories of dads taking their kids to the beach and to the mountains and teaching them how to play baseball, football, and all these things. And tears began flowing down my cheek as I began to understand why he wanted me to read the book. And so I finished the last page, and he said, Dad, do you love me? And I said, yes. He said, are you sure? And I said, absolutely, son. He said, well, Dad, be the dad in the Daddy book then. He didn't understand why I was just sitting still in that wheelchair. He thought I wasn't playing on the floor and I wasn't throwing the ball with him as much and that kind of thing because I didn't love him. And so I began, playing baseball and playing football in a wheelchair, doing all those things to be the dad in the Daddy book. And he's now a U.S. Marine. And so 20 years later, I went to his graduation, and this big guy came walking up to me after the graduation and said, are you Mr. Bryant? And I said, yes. And he said, I have a story to tell you. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, your son, out of 300 Marines, and they're all in great shape, he was the first one to the top of this mountain in a race with all these Marines in full pack, full uniform, and he went over the top first. And he said, I saw such incredible, dedication and such just determination in his eyes. And I asked him, well, son, tell me how you were able to do this. I want to put that in the eyes of other Marines. And he said, simple, Sarge, I'm running for 2 people. I'm running for my dad, and I'm running for myself. And he walked away, and my son walked up to me and said, Dad, that is what I told him, but Dad, what I couldn't tell him, what he couldn't possibly understand is, Dad, you are the dad in the Daddy book. He remembered that all those years, even though we never repeated it. And, I eventually learned to walk with braces and crutches. I eventually set a world record, Guinness World Record for rowing at 3,280 miles from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., and the reason that I did those things was to be the dad in the Daddy book. And so my encouragement to everyone that's listening to this is to give it everything you have and do the best job you can, as a mom, as a dad, as an employee, because there's people watching us. Not watching us when things are going well. Anyone can can prosper when things are going well. They're watching you when things fall apart. And that's when they ask quality professionals to step forward, take charge, when things aren't going well. And Lean has helped me improve my personal life, as I've been, writing books and learning to walk and doing those things. And, of course, they've assisted me at work.
Well, I want to thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for sharing, your inspiring personal story in addition to talking about just what's going on with Lean at CSC. For anybody who wants to read more about your background, I'll post links on the blog page for the podcast here. But Rob, if you could share for the listeners your personal website if people want to read more.
Sure, it's just robbryant.com, ROBBRYANT.com.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you being here on the podcast.
Been a real pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.